The Beginner's Guide is a game made by Davey Wreden, who you might know from the Stanley Parable. I'm not sure if this game is based on a true story, and I haven't actually looked it up, partially because I don't want to know. Because this game really drives home a few points that I can directly relate to, and something that I've struggled with many times, which is validation and acceptance. The game starts by talking about one of his friends named Coda, and this game goes through many of Coda's unfinished games throughout. That is the heart of this game. It's a little dive into some projects by the aforementioned Coda. We start with a simple Counter Strike looking level. It's nothing fancy, just a textured little area, but the narration here is what's special. We're told that Coda made many unfinished games throughout 2008 to 2011, where he just abruptly stopped. I found this game to be special because we all take part in hobbies or activities and we have dreams or projects that we want to complete or achieve, and we often stumble along the way. Take, for instance, creating YouTube videos. I've been creating YouTube videos for quite some time now with varied success. I've tried Let's Plays and horror compilations, indie horror playthroughs, sessions, skate sim, and more until I landed on these types of videos short little breakdowns and thoughts on why I love certain games. And I just wanted to thank you for checking it out. Anyways, back to the game. We open Dakota's first actual game. It appears to be on a spaceship of some sort. There's alarms ringing, fires that are active, and we as a player are traversing the ship with a gun. There isn't much to do in this game, but even in its bare bones state, I was intrigued. There was an idea here, and Coda took a step and began making a game that he envisioned. He took the first step, which is often the hardest in any project. A little further into the game, we find out that we have to turn off the whisper machine. And once we reach the engine room, we get a voice line that tells us we can save everyone. But in order to do that, to save everyone, we have to sacrifice ourselves to destroy this machine. We do eventually step into the machine and sacrifice ourselves, which is a hero's decision, but there's a bug. The beam actually makes us just float into the sky and see the world for what it is. The narrator does a great job of explaining why this bug turned into something greater, so I'll actually let him explain.
Because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system. Or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place, juxtaposed against all of the hysteria that you've just had to traverse. I don't even know. I have no idea what he was thinking, but what's clear is that after making this, something lodges itself in his brain. He wants to do more of these really weird and experimental designs. So he stops work on this and moves on to a stream of tiny little games that go in all sorts of directions.
Because of this new revelation, we come into Coda's next game. It's called The Past Was Behind Her. It's a game where you can only walk backwards, but as you do, this story unfolds via text lines that prop themselves up on the walls, and I actually thought this was an interesting idea. It has more character to it than a simple space station shooter and is actually an interesting way of telling a story. It really shows there was thought process behind the storytelling. But we move forward onto the next game. We spawn in darkness with a little sign that says now entering, and then the game ends. But the narrator promises that it'll be interesting a little further into the game, so we'll touch on it again later. We progress through another game where there's a few large buildings and a large staircase, which we obviously climb, but halfway up, our walk speed is slowed down to a crawl and then almost stops completely. But there's a door at the top which opens. We weren't meant to reach the door. The game's narrator eventually does let us reach the top, and inside there's a nice warm room filled with little notes. Notes about games that Coda wanted to make. He stored his ideas here. This can reflect on many of us. We have so many ideas and dreams, but we often just compartmentalize them and never actually take the leap to try to achieve something. And as I've said before, taking the first step is actually quite difficult. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection, it's all very real. And I felt this game was speaking directly to me. The next game is a simple corridor with a simple puzzle, and there's nothing left to do. But our narrator friend removes the walls, revealing a vast landscape of corridors and stairs and effort. Someone made all of this, but it never got to see the light of day. These games have so much heart in them, but they were all abandoned before getting finished and before showing anyone. We come back to the dark level with a little sign, and we're told that all of these games are actually connected, and there's a much larger picture being painted here for us. The next game shows a large white area with a couple houses. Our narrator friend here discusses game engines, in particular the Source engine, and how the Source engine is really good at boxy, empty corridors, which is why so many of Coda's games look like this. Each level leads into a large open linear area, but something was eventually going to change. As I descended this level, we're met with another long corridor, but this one feels different. It has the emptiness, but this is actually a prison. And once we reach our room, we're told that the prison cell was supposed to stay locked for an hour in real time. But the narrator lets us skip ahead. He tells us that him and Coda got into arguments about whether or not games should be playable and approachable. I can see sides for both arguments here. Of course, at first you think a game should be playable and enjoyable, but isn't there also a space for games that defy these generalizations? And I think that goes for a lot of things in life as well. Sometimes we can break the norm regardless of what's expected of us. Throughout these games, we're presented with a simple little puzzle, and the narrator tells us that this gets repeated over and over throughout the games, and that he will give us his interpretation later. We eventually reach the basement of the jail where Coda has implemented a sort of text dialogue interaction with the player. His games are evolving. The NPCs eventually tell us to not solve the puzzle and to embrace the darkness, saying that we'll learn to enjoy it. When we finally progress, we find a lamppost, and we're told that from now on, this lamppost will appear at the end of every one of his games. He wants a destination for his games to reach, we're told, and for some reason, this is the object he chose. Something simple, something that gave him a goal to work towards, a goal for the player to reach, something to hold on to, something familiar between each and every one of his games. The next game is simple, but the narrator tells us that this was the first game he saw Coda working on, and this is actually how they became friends. He also tells us that these notes are all left by Coda himself, and that perhaps this is showing loneliness. He intended for his games to be played by many and to leave notes for each other to interact. It seems like he had the ultimate goal of sharing these ideas, but he never did. However, we do get to experience them through this game, through the beginner's guide. It feels like we can appreciate the process of someone who had a passion for making games. Our narrator finally expresses his thoughts on what the simple puzzle meant, the one that Coda reuses constantly. It seems almost every game ends with the same puzzle, and Coda places it at the end on purpose. Once he's done with his idea for a certain game, he places the familiar puzzle and he knows the solution to it. It's something reliable, and once he solves it, he can move on to another project. It's kind of a finishing piece. And of course, at the end of the game, there's also the lamppost. The next game starts, and we're locked in a room with bars stopping our way to the outside world. All we can see is a cliff, the sky, and a well. After some time, we find a secret door and traverse our way down some long corridors as usual, but it doesn't really lead anywhere. It just leads to a dark room. But we learn that Coda is going to make many iterations of this same prison, and we're shown the next one. We can actually decorate the room via text interactions. Coda wanted to add more character and life to these games, giving us a choice, and giving us, the player, a chance to build parts of the games ourselves. This was a shared journey between player and builder, and getting to experience the process here really glued me to the screen. The next iteration, the same prison, this time in a void, and now we have a very clear instructions on how to decorate the room. We're given guidance instead of free will. We decorate the room and then we're sent back to the prison, but this time we can't escape. We do see multiple other iterations really quickly, and this was clearly an important idea to Coda, and he wanted to explore it thoroughly until he just stops with one final iteration. It's very different than the rest. The prison itself is not actually in it, but instead we reach a phone booth. When we answer the phone, we're told the person on the phone is actually ourselves, and that they are us when we were still trapped in the prison. We're having a conversation with ourselves. And I felt this was a very neat idea, but as our narrator says, this was actually Coda speaking to himself. He was trying to flesh out this idea in his head, as with all of his games. He had an idea and just needed someone else's viewpoint, but he may not have had that. The narrator tells us this is why Coda ended up here with the prison idea. He made the dialogue to tell himself that things were going to be okay. He just needed some reassurance. We move on to the next game. It's a narrative-driven game. We seem to be late for something, and this NPC says they cleaned the house all by themselves. but they ask for our help, which we oblige. And we find out that they're a house cleaner. We ask if they enjoy what they do, but they say no, not really. But while they're working, they feel a calm that rests in a pit of their ribcage and that their soul can't be soothed any other way. This, I feel, is Coda speaking directly to the player, that he has to keep working and keep making games to feel his calm, to feel like he's achieving something, to have something to work towards. I don't want this video to be about me, but I've experienced this very thing. A large life setback occurred, and I was left with not much on my plate, nothing to work towards. So I started streaming on Twitch and making YouTube videos to fill my time, to have something to work towards and to feel like I had a purpose. The whole reason I started making content in the first place was to fill a void that I had, and funnily enough, it kind of worked. It's the reason I still make videos today. And if you made it this far, I want to sincerely thank you for sticking around. I do this because I love it, and also because it got me through some really hard times. Also, I just want to say, if you are struggling and need help, then reach out to someone you trust, a professional, anyone. Just reach out, please. But back to the game. The minigame here seems nice and calm, a little rest from Coda's usual games. This was more of a mental cleanser, a little peace in an otherwise chaotic environment. This game tells us that we, in quotes, can't stay in the dark place for too long. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive. And I think this rings true in life. We just have to carry on no matter how dark things get. On to the next game. We're in a university lecture hall. It asks us why we're here, and it tells us that we came here to actually become perfect, and that we're here to make people think we are perfect, and that people will compare themselves to our perfection. I think this game touches on a seemingly common goal of perfection, and that we see others as better people than we are. And then the perspective shifts. We are now the teacher, and we see this giant hole in the sky. We're seeing their troubles. This perspective shift shows us that everyone has their own struggles. No one is perfect. Each person has their own story unfolding in front of them, and we only know the tip of the iceberg. So try not to compare yourselves to the perceived success of others. At least that's what I got from it. On to the next. We're on a stage. It seems we are in a play, being given instructions. This stage game again shows a strive for greatness. It tells us that the person across from us is a professional, and we have one chance to impress her so we can learn the key to success. I feel this is a theme of this game. Striving for greatness, but at the same time lacking confidence. Assuming others are better at things than we are. That others are inherently more talented and we should strive to be like them. It's trying to tell us that we don't have to look at someone else's success and we don't have to compare ourselves to others. We have the strength inside of us. We just need to learn to be okay with ourselves, to accept ourselves for who we are, and to just try. Try doing things we're passionate about. Try to achieve those goals no matter how many times we fail. The next game we see is back in space, and there's something hurling towards our ship. There's seemingly no way to stop it, and there's panic amongst the NPCs, amongst ourselves, and then it crashes into us, and the game starts over. It tells us the only way to solve this problem is to speak something creative and truthful. We try speaking, "I'm full of creative energy," but it tells us that that is a lie. This is Coda speaking to himself, that he feels he's not good enough, that he won't succeed at what he's doing. He built in a way to discredit himself, and then we try another line. "My work is always fun," but that's also a lie. There's a lot of self-doubt here. Our solution is presented to us, and the truth we speak is, "I can't keep making these." He then says he's out of ideas, and that he's not having fun making them anymore, and that he's stuck. I've definitely felt like this in real life, with content creation, with work, with many things. You can often just feel stuck and that you're not good enough. This is why this game speaks to me so much. It's a representation of all the struggles we have in life, especially in our passion projects that make us hesitant to begin or even just quit outright. It's a common feeling amongst many, and I don't think we quite realize how prevalent it actually is. Everyone doubts themselves, and no one really has it all together, even though we often think they do. The next game comes on, and our narrator tells us that Coda may be going through depression, and that he's isolating himself, but yet he keeps making games and never releasing them. But why? The narrator tells us that we can't be the person who both writes the question and the answer, that loneliness can take over. We need others. We need interaction. And personally, I think a lot of that gets turned into desiring validation. which can sometimes be unhealthy. But what we need is to surround ourselves with like minded individuals who will boost you up and not people to compare yourself to. This game is a clear sign of frustration. He was out of ideas, he was lonely, and he felt like a failure. But 7 months later, Coda has a new game. It's called The Machine. The NPC tells us that they've captured the machine and that we can interrogate it when we're ready. We make our way inside, and there's dozens of members of press. There's many eyes on this project, or at least that's what Coda had envisioned. Perhaps that's what he wanted all along. We make our way to the machine, and there's a short interrogation scene, but the machine says we stopped feeding it and that we're responsible for the pain that everyone outside is suffering from, that we have to speak to them. We make our way outside and tell everyone that the machine will not apologize, and that we're stronger than it. We plan on destroying everything the machine has created. We then get a gun, and when we shoot, it actually starts erasing the game that we're in. The work has become self-destructive. It seems like Coda's given up, and much beyond that, he's begun to destroy his own work. He's having a sort of collapse where he's no longer fulfilled with his work. There's no longer meaning in any of it, and he was getting ready to quit. Our narrator tells us that he tried helping him by showing some of his games to other people, and that many of the people he showed actually really enjoyed the work. Coda didn't need to be afraid of the judgment of others. He was creating something that people could enjoy, and that he could enjoy making. Our narrator believes that people need to be told that your work is good, and that you're doing good. This is why he showed other people, because that's what he felt he always needed. He needed the validation, and it made him feel like a good person. To provide a friend with positive feedback on his work, to show others what he's accomplished. But maybe that's not actually what Coda needed or wanted. Our narrator tells us that he received a game a few weeks later from Coda. It was in an email, and it was the last game that Coda ever made. It's called The Tower. The game, we're told, feels distant and cold and empty. It has a jarring maze with invisible walls that resets you every time you touch it, with a nasty shock accompanying it. Our narrator lets us past the maze, and he talks about how this game feels different. It feels frustrating. The invisible maze is followed by a 6-digit code that just needs to be guessed. There's no hints, there's no way to find the answer. Nothing. Just a waste of the player's time. This game was not meant to be played, or at least enjoyed. It was different. Next, we reach a door which is actually impossible to open. Coda does not want us to progress. He made it impossible. He was isolating himself in the world from his projects and from his passion. Our narrator tells us that he no longer feels like he knows Coda, and that he's become a different person. He says he spent years trying to find more about Coda, what the meanings of all his games were, what the repeating puzzle was for, all of it. What did it all mean? And if he just figured this out, he could be happy. Our narrator wanted to solve these problems for Coda, and that when he couldn't, it felt like he had failed as a friend. And then we reach the top of the tower. It's a sign, and it says, "Dear Davy, thank you for your interest in my games. I need to ask you to not speak to me anymore." Our narrator was the reason Coda stopped making games. He says he poisoned it for him. The next sign says, "I wonder if you thought that I'm making these games for you." Our narrator says that while he was showing others Coda's work, he felt good about himself. That he was doing something nice and kind for a friend. He felt like a good person. He felt like he was making a difference. But that's not what Coda wanted. It seems like our narrator was trying to fill a void in himself, that he was unhappy with who he was. And there's a line I actually really like in this. It says, "The fact you think that I am frustrated or broken says more about you than it does about me." I think he tried to fix something that wasn't broken, and by doing so, made him feel good about himself. Both of these characters had voids that needed filled, and perhaps they both went about it the wrong way. Coda leaves a sign that says that he hopes we make peace with this thing that we are wrestling inside of us. The narrator says he feels he did something stupid, and only because he actually doesn't like himself. He says this game is being released in hopes that it can find its way back to Coda just to say he's sorry. Our narrator always felt okay as long as he could see himself in Coda. But by making the beginner's guide, he's doing it all over again. We get into a spiral that I'll let play out because I think it's best delivered the way it was intended.
If I apologize to you truly and deeply, will you start making games again? Please, I need to feel okay with myself again. And I always felt okay as long as I had your work to see myself in. I mean, is something wrong with me? There has to be something wrong with me.
Can I apologize? What if I tell you I was wrong? Will that work? Will that fix it? I don't know. I don't think it will, but there's nothing else that I can do. Just tell me what you want. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, start making games again. Please help me. Please give me some of whatever it is that makes you complete. I want whatever that wholeness is that you just summoned out of nothing and you put into your work. You were complete in some way that I never was. And I want to know I want to know how to be a good person. I want to know how not to hate myself. Please. I'm fading, and all I want is to know that I'm going to be okay.
All I want is to know that I'm going to be okay. Isn't that what we all want? For someone to tell us we will be okay, to know that we'll be okay? We don't need validation, even if we think we do. We just need to be okay with ourselves. We need to be okay with trying and failing, but also be okay with others doing their own thing. We need not impose our ideas on others, and sometimes what we perceive as failures of others is really just them trying and succeeding in their own way. Sometimes we just need to tell others that we like what they're doing. We need to encourage them, and sometimes just tell them things will be okay. Thanks for watching.